This guide is designed to introduce newer players to a couple of key concepts that can be very complex to understand when starting to learn harder content in Old School RuneScape. In this guide, I am going to keep it simple and only talk about the key information that is going to improve your gameplay. I'm going to start by introducing a key concept that is fundamental for new players to understand in order to know when they should be clicking. I'm going to build on this concept by explaining how it applies to using prayers and then how it applies to pathing. Next, I will go over why using an order of operations is important when doing harder content and how it is crucial to timing your clicks. After that, I will talk about eating, which sounds pretty basic, but is one of the most important concepts to understand in Old School RuneScape. Each of these concepts builds onto the next, but feel free to jump to any section. The first real challenge in Old School RuneScape that shows you the importance of timing your clicks is fighting Jad in the Fight Caves. In this fight, you need to use your protection prayers or you can be killed in one hit. If you're fighting from a distance, Jad will use range and magic attacks in a random order, and so if you don't understand what time you need to have your protection prayers active in order to avoid damage, this fight will be very difficult for you. I would say that most new players, myself included, would think that you need to have your protection prayer on before the projectile hits your character. However, this is actually false. You need to have it on before you even see the projectile appear. This is the concept that I would like to call clicking before you think you need to. While it is pretty easy to understand how this applies in the Jad fight, it also applies to pretty much all content in Old School RuneScape. So let me explain to you how the concept works when using protection prayers in the Jad fight, as well as with all other monsters in Old School RuneScape. In the Jad fight, you need to have the correct prayer on before you even see a projectile appear. If you see a projectile and have the wrong protection prayer on, it is already too late. Even though you won't see the hit splat until a projectile hits you, the correct protection prayer needs to be on beforehand. So how do you know when to have it on? Well, in the Jad fight, there is actually a visual cue that shows you what prayer you need to have on. The stomp is protect from range, and the bear stand is protect from magic. You then have to be quick to have the right prayer on, because in a couple seconds a projectile will appear and it will be too late. This is why mouse movement is the #1 most important way to improve your Old School RuneScape gameplay. You need to be quick with your clicks. But what about with other monsters in Old School RuneScape? Well, most of them don't actually have visual cues to let you know before they are going to attack. In fact, 95% of monsters in Old School RuneScape only have a visual cue to show you if you are too late. Let's use the Basilisk Knights as an example because these are one of the first monsters I practiced prayer flicking on during my Slayer tasks. I would use a safe spot and range when fighting these knights so that they could only attack me with magic. I figured if I could use protect from magic at the right time, then I would have way longer trips here during my Slayer tasks. At first, I really had no idea what I was doing, but I eventually figured out that I needed to have my protection prayer on right before I see their attack animation. If I put my prayer on after this moment, even just 1 millisecond after the Basilisk moves, then it was already too late. But what this told me is that as long as I have my prayer on before I see the monster move, I am then safe to turn my prayer off as soon as it moves. This concept applies to 99% of monsters in Old School RuneScape. Use the attack animation of monsters to indicate when you should turn your prayers off. Simply turn whatever protection prayer on that the monster attacks with, wait until you see the monster move, shut your prayer off, wait a little bit, and then make sure that you have your prayer back on before you see the monster's attack animation again. The same concept applies to offensive prayers as well. You need to have your offensive prayer on before you see your own player's attack animation. As soon as you see your player move, then you are safe to shut off your prayer. The biggest advantage to learning offensive prayers is that when you successfully flick on your offensive prayer, the XP drop for your attack will be shaded. That is, if you are using RuneLite, which you 100% should be by now. If you miss the offensive prayer, then your XP text will be normal and you will have missed your prayer flick. As a new player, the easiest way for me to understand this concept was just having my prayer on before I thought I needed to. I feel like it is instinct to think that you need to have your protection prayers on after you see a monster move or before a projectile hits you. But if you even see a projectile, 99% of the time it is already too late. There are very few exceptions to this rule. However, one example is the Zabak fight in the Tombs of Amascut. By the time you encounter fights that have the exception to this rule, you should have a better understanding of how the timing of protection prayers work. It should be clear in the guides that you watch for these pieces of content that they are exceptions to the general rule of clicking before you think you need to. Now, the rule of clicking before you need to is less evident when it comes to pathing. However, it still applies. For this example, I'm going to use the Vorkath fight because that is actually where I learned how pathing works. During the acid phase, you need to obviously avoid the acid. However, if your character is about to step in acid and you click sideways to avoid the path, he will still walk forward into the acid. Why is that? Well, that is because there is about a 2-tile delay in when your character responds to your clicks, if your character is walking. If your character is running, then the delay is actually 4 tiles, it doubles. Therefore, you need to click before you instinctively think you need to. Now, there is no need to be counting tiles or any foolishness like that, but just realize that you need to be thinking about 2 tiles ahead minimum when it comes to pathing. So if there is acid in front of you, click sideways to avoid it at least 2 tiles beforehand and realize that your character will eventually move sideways. But say there is another tile of acid immediately beside where your character will turn. Well, that means that you need to click almost immediately after you click sideways in order for your character to zigzag. This concept is a little bit harder to understand in practice, but using the True Tile Indicator plugin on RuneLite will help you massively. I learned this without this plugin and the process was way longer than it needed to be, so please just use this tile if you don't know how pathing works. The other way I would say you can apply the concept of clicking before you think you need to when pathing is when you are fighting a boss and running away to avoid damage. This is known as kiting. A prime example is when you are fighting the Phantom Muspa. Now, when you attack a boss as you are running from it, it is instinct to wait until you see your player perform the attack animation before you click to start running again. In reality, to be successful kiting, you need to click as soon as you see the XP drop from your attack, which is just slightly before the attack animation. It takes some practice to get this down, and if you hit a 0, you don't have an indicator for when you need to click. But as with all things in life, the more time you invest in doing this activity with the intention of getting better, then the better your clicks will become. Now, there is one other crucial piece of information you need to consider when pathing and attacking a boss or player. You need to consider the speed at which your weapon attacks. You can find out your weapon speed by going to your equipment stats, and it will tell you under the weapon speed section the interval at which your weapon attacks. This means your weapon will attack every 2.4 seconds. So if you are running away from a boss and try to attack after only 2 seconds, then your character is going to stand still for another 0.4 seconds before you see the XP drop. When you are kiting, you obviously don't want to stop moving or else the boss is going to catch up and hit you. And so it is more important to wait a little bit longer to ensure your weapon is ready to attack before you click. Again, it is hard to do this perfectly, but being aware of how to time your attacks while moving is the first step to improvement. As you do more activities in Old School RuneScape where this timing is important to do correctly, the better you will get over time. The key to getting better at this attacking / pathing timing is actually by understanding what order of operations you need to use when doing a boss. The order in which you click to attack, eat, or move is what determines if you successfully do a piece of content in Old School RuneScape or kill your opponent in PvP. The most important basic principle to understand for using an order of operations in PvM is taking advantage of moments where you cannot do damage to a boss. If you cannot damage the boss, then this is when you need to ensure that your health is as close to full as possible. During the time when you can attack a boss, you never want to be wasting your time eating, unless you are below the boss's max hit. Every boss in Old School RuneScape has a max hit, and you should know what that number is before the fight starts so that you can prioritize doing damage at the correct times versus when you should be eating. But even more important than doing damage or eating in a fight is avoiding damage. Bosses will have mechanics that require you to move to certain tiles or to change your prayers, and if done correctly, you will not take damage. This should always be the #1 priority in your order of operations, because if you can avoid all damage, then you can stay in a fight for an infinite amount of time. But in reality, that is not actually how it works, because there is also unavoidable damage in every fight. Unavoidable damage usually comes in small amounts, but will eat away at your supplies over time if you are not using an order of operations to prioritize when you should be attacking versus eating. So for every boss fight, this is generally my order of operations / like priority list. Number 1 is to avoid all avoidable damage whenever possible. Number 2 is attacking the boss when it is vulnerable at all times, unless my HP goes below the boss's max hit for unavoidable damage. Number 3 is eating when the boss is invincible. This is usually a small period when the boss is changing phases. Number 4 is to eat when I am moving, meaning when I need to move to a certain tile in order to avoid damage, I cannot attack due to following rule number 1. Therefore, if I have time to eat while I am moving to a tile, even though a boss is vulnerable, I should do it because I am actively avoiding damage and cannot currently attack. So by eating here, I'm just not wasting time at eating at a different time. With all this in mind, just realize that you don't need to be perfect with all your timing, but if you follow these general rules, they will take you pretty far in Old School RuneScape. Especially if you know how to take advantage of the timing of when you should eat. Eating, in my mind, is the most important concept to get down when it comes to Old School RuneScape. No matter what fight you are doing, there is an optimal time to be eating. Say you have a weapon that has a speed of 2.4 seconds. That means every 2.4 seconds you will attack. But if you eat a piece of food, then you will notice that there is a delay in your attack following when you click a piece of food. If you try to eat 2 pieces of food in a row, then you will notice that there is a delay between when you can click the next piece of food. This is how the majority of food behaves in Old School RuneScape. However, potions act a little bit different. If you drink a dose of a prayer pot, you will notice that there is no delay in your next attack. The same goes for the only potion that heals you, Saradomin Brews. The trade-off here is that they drain your stats. And there is still a delay if you try to drink 2 doses of a potion in a row, or if you try to eat a piece of food following a dose of a potion. You can, however, drink a dose of a potion immediately after eating a piece of food, and there would only be the regular food delay before your next attack. There is one food group in the game that is an exception to these rules, the Karambuan, as well as some other gnome foods. I would argue that the Karambuan is the most useful piece of food in all of Old School RuneScape. The Karambuan heals for 18 and can be eaten simultaneously with another piece of food. This allows you to heal twice as much in the same amount of time. And your attack is only delayed by an additional 1.2 seconds instead of the usual 1.8 second delay. This trait is extremely useful and almost necessary in some fights such as the Zulrah fight. The final thing that is important to know for eating is that you can actually eat 2 pieces of food and drink a dose of a potion all in the same amount of attack delay. Again, the order in which you eat here is crucial to how it works. To eat all 3 with the same amount of delay, you must eat a normal piece of food, drink a dose of a potion, and then eat a Karambuan. Using this technique with a Saradomin brew allows you to heal a massive amount of HP in a small amount of time, but honestly, there aren't many cases where you need to use this in PvM, other than if you simply want to drink a dose of a prayer pot at the same time as you're healing. Other than that, this technique is mostly used in PvP, but it can be helpful if you're tanking a PKer when trying to escape in the wilderness. Second to mouse movement, knowing how to time your clicks in Old School RuneScape is crucial to improvement. The best way to improve your timing is by intentionally practicing while doing fun content. But honestly, as long as you are aware that timing your clicks is important and the order in which you do things matters, then you will become a better player over time. RuneScape is a game built around rhythm. The best way to have better rhythm while dancing is simply to dance. And so to become a better RuneScape player, the best way to improve is just to play the game and have fun. One of the reasons it's so fun is because there's an endless amount of knowledge to learn about. So continue to challenge yourself. Try new things, and realize it will take time. Whatever your goals are, I believe that you can reach them. Just don't give up and find ways to enjoy the process. You got this.